Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in with me and coming on this adventure. This is the Blue to Green podcast, and my name is AJ Jacobs. On today's episode, I sit down with a criminal defense attorney who lives here in the Phoenix Valley by the name of Robert Campos. We cover his entire career, stemming everything from being a prosecutor in La Paz County when he first started out, and prosecuting crimes ranging from a traffic ticket all the way up to murder and everything in between, to at some point in time he switched over and became a criminal defense attorney, which is how I met Robert. In this episode, we talk about your rights as a United States citizen, how to interact with law enforcement, criminal justice reform, and a myriad of topics, including law enforcement, cannabis, and everything. So I sincerely hope that you learn something from this podcast, and I appreciate any feedback. If you take the time to send me a message on Facebook, Blue to Green Podcast, Instagram is bluetogreen.officialpodcast, or you can email me, bluetogreenpodcast@gmail.com. Again, I appreciate the support. I appreciate the listeners and everybody tuning in, and thank you very much for your time. Until next time, take care. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This is AJ Jacobs, your host of the Blue to Green podcast. Today, my guest is Mr. Robert Campos, who is a criminal defense attorney here in the state of Arizona. I won't bore you with my details. I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you for having me, AJ. I've been practicing law here in the state of Arizona for about 33 years. Certified criminal law specialist. Started off as a prosecutor, La Paz County, deputy county attorney for 2 years. Then went over to Maricopa County, was a prosecutor there for about 9 years. I left the office in 1996 and started my own law firm, Robert J. Campos and Associates, P.L.C., primarily doing criminal defense, some serious PI work once in a while, and lately I've been doing some civil rights cases. As a prosecutor, I prosecuted everything from a traffic ticket to murder. Was in the sex crimes unit, prosecuted child molest cases, pornography cases. Was in the drug unit, prosecuted drug cases. Was in the gang unit, prosecuted gang-related cases, homicides. As a criminal defense lawyer, I've handled everything from traffic ticket to murder cases also, and because of my past experience in sex crimes, considered an expert in the defense and prosecution of sex cases. And that's primarily my experience. I did off and on work as a pro tem judge for the city of Scottsdale, the city of Glendale, and the Pasquayaqui tribe in Tucson. I believe in the Constitution of the United States, no matter what side you're on, whether on the bench, the prosecution, or defense. I think that's what keeps us free. And so I have the ability to work on whatever side. Just some prosecutors who can never do defense, and there's some defense that can never do prosecution. I believe in the Constitution. I believe that people have a right to voice their point of view, and as long as you do it lawfully and ethically, you have a right to a good lawyer that will help you put your position out there.
Why is it then that court-appointed attorneys are sometimes subpar? Is it just a lack of experience? Are they the ones going into the? Are they new in the field?
I believe that lawyers who work for the public defender's office, the legal defender's office, are lawyers who are really committed.
Okay.
And they really believe in giving people a solid defense. However, our system hampers them from the very beginning. They have caseloads that can be difficult to manage. Although the offices try not to give their lawyers too many cases. But if you look at public defender's office around the country, you'll see instances where public defenders just have way too many cases assigned. No matter how much they want to help that person, they just can't.
Gotcha.
They don't have the investigative resources, the money to hire the right experts, so they're hampered. They also get clients who generally don't have any money.
Right.
They're repeat offenders. They're the type of client that a private lawyer does not wish to handle. They're getting the murderers, or the serious rapists, the serious child molesters, repeat offenders, people with prior felony convictions who've been to prison, who don't have family support. Those are really tough people to defend. And then you get a truckload of people like that to defend. It's very difficult.
Gotcha.
But I have found that most public defenders really care about what they do, really try, especially in Arizona.
Gotcha.
And they're actually quality lawyers.
Overworked and underpaid?
Yes.
No.
So that's really my perspective, and that's what I tell clients when they come to talk to me. I don't badmouth the public defenders.
Right.
They're in a tough position. It's just, I tell them that this is my analogy. I said, if you're hungry, you can go to Jack in the Box and you can get fast food. It's unfortunately the public defender system. They're going to give you a defense that is enough to feed you.
Gotcha.
But it's not going to be a 5-star restaurant where you have a privately retained lawyer who can give you, a lot of attention, has a limited caseload, has a lot of resources, but you're paying for it. So in America, unfortunately, if you have money, you're going to get a better quality lawyer, you're going to get a better defense. And you're going to get something closer to justice than if you are poor and you can't afford to hire your own lawyer. That's unfortunately, it's what it comes down to.
On that note, speaking of justice and defense and all that, everybody understands that there are issues with the criminal justice system that are happening right now. What would be your biggest... If you were king for a day and had the wand, what would be one of the things that you reformed, changed? Do me a favor, pull that mic just a little bit more closer to it. It'll swivel a little bit more.
I would really take a look at mandatory sentencing.
Okay.
Not only in the federal system, but especially in the state system. And since I practice in Arizona, I'll talk specifically about Arizona. The county attorney's offices around our state are very active in the legislature, and they've convinced legislators that they should not trust judges.
Okay.
And that there should be a lot of mandatory provisions so that it takes discretion away from judges.
Okay.
That's what I see as the biggest flaw.
Okay.
If you're going to elect or appoint a judge, you need to allow that judge the freedom to decide sentences. And when you hamstring that judge, and the judge has no options but to sentence people to prison for lengthy terms, you're allowing many times a young prosecutor with limited life experience to make the decision about how a person should be sentenced. That would be my biggest recommendation, is to do away with mandatory sentencing laws. And I don't think people really understand the extent that of power that a young prosecutor has.
Okay.
You have the sentences that are mandatory based on the amount of drug that you have, the quantity, the type, if you use a weapon. And most people think of a gun or a knife, but a weapon can be anything.
Right.
It could be a pencil.
Right.
And if a prosecutor alleges that that's a dangerous instrument, you're looking at mandatory prison on the offense. So it just permeates the entire criminal justice system, and judges, unfortunately, become mere clerks.
Okay.
They are just going from one file to the next, and prosecutors are unwilling to agree to allow a judge at the discretion to do the sentencing.
Okay.
So, I mean, that is I think the biggest flaw currently in our system. If you're going to have a judge, allow the judge at discretion to make the right call. Allow the defense attorney to provide the mitigation. Allow the prosecutor to provide the aggravation.
Okay.
And allow a neutral judge to make a decision about what is best for society and that particular defendant.
Okay. That's very interesting points, things that I don't think I've ever thought about as well. So it's just by having the minimum sentences, the judges just take a look at this and say, okay, well, you're guilty. So if they're found guilty, then they just go off of what the what the minimum sentences are.
Correct. As an example, let's say you have a weapon, you lawfully own a weapon, it's registered, you have a concealed weapons permit, you're trained, and you get yourself in a situation where you think you need to draw that weapon for self-defense. You don't even point it. If the county attorney thinks that you did not have a legitimate reason to show that weapon, they can charge you with aggravated assault. And I have clients that say, well, I never pulled the gun, I never pointed it, and never shot it. Well, how can I be charged? Well, in Arizona, the charge of aggravated assault is if you put somebody in fear.
Right.
So they just need to see the weapon.
Right.
And now you're looking at 5 to 15 years mandatory prison. So a person who has no record, never been in trouble with the law, legitimately believes that they had a right to self-defense, is put in the predicament of take this deal for probation
Right.
with 6 months in jail, or roll the dice that a jury is going to agree that you had a legitimate fear
Right.
and could display that weapon. The other problem with the system is that jury is going to be given a instruction that says, do not worry about the sentence, the judge decides the sentence.
Okay.
And I've spoken to many jurors over 33 years, and they have in their mind the idea that the judge can give this person probation.
Right.
So they feel free to find, well, you know what, we think the person wasn't justified, we found him guilty, but we were confident the judge would hand down the right sentence and would give him probation.
Okay.
Doesn't deserve, prison or jail under these facts. They're shocked to know that the judge did not have that ability, and the minimum they could give that poor person was 5 years in prison. So that is the problem. And I have clients that are Second Amendment advocates.
Okay.
They believe in guns, and I need to caution them all the time that just merely displaying your weapon in a situation where there's an after-the-fact evaluation by a young prosecutor that you should not have done it could land you in a whole heap of trouble.
Do they, in a situation like this, we're speaking very specifically about it, where somebody pulls a weapon, what about the emotional charge of it? Say father's out with his family and, whatever, there's an riot happens or whatever, and that person pulls the gun. Does the prosecutor ever take into consideration the emotional charge of it, the totality of the circumstances, in your opinion? Yeah,
well, I think they think they do.
Okay.
But that's what you have a judge for.
Okay.
And I know this as a former prosecutor. I look back at some of the decisions that I made, and I'm not sure that I would make the same decisions now. I have a lot more life experience.
Right.
I have a lot more experience with the law.
Right.
I have a broader view. Things are not black and white.
Right.
When you're a young prosecutor, things are very black and white, unfortunately. and so I would make some different decisions. But a lot of it also has to do with who's the county attorney,
Gotcha.
and what their policies are with respect to criminal offenses, drug crimes, gun crimes, and I'll say this: fortunately, Arizona now has a top county attorney that believes in giving their line prosecutors more discretion, which I think is a good thing.
Okay, that's a good thing. I agree. One of the things that the entire intent of this podcast and bringing folks on such as yourself is to help bridge the gap between law enforcement, the law, the community, and the focus of this is particularly cannabis and cannabis patients. I myself am a cannabis patient. I'm also a former law enforcement officer, as you know. Robert and I actually met because he defended me. So, which was a good thing. But on the point, though, I feel exactly the same way. I look back at my career as a law enforcement officer, and I look at how I think now and my life experiences now outside of law enforcement, and it makes me a much more well-rounded human being. But unfortunately, these lessons just come with time. I take a look at the decisions that I made as a young cop, and how I think I would handle that decision now, and it's completely different. And it's molded on the fact of when I was new, everything was black and white. It was black and white. This is the law. I am the law enforcement officer. This is what's going to happen, period. But now there's so much more complexities to it, and there's so much more to just the letter of the law. And I think that this is part of the conversations that need to happen as far as helping to reform and helping to change, and to change people's hearts and to change people's minds, and to understand that there's a hell of a lot more going on in people's lives. Somebody didn't just wake up and decide to be a criminal and an asshole one day. Things led down that path. We all make stupid mistakes. We all do make stupid decisions that could potentially be criminal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that person is a criminal that deserves 5 years in prison. I do think that this is part of these conversations that need to occur in order to get some real reform and some real change and some understanding.
You matured.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, my wife doesn't think so, but yes, I have matured. Neither do my kids, but yes. So recently, though, Prop 207 did pass in Arizona, and when I had asked you to come on here, you had asked me, do you want to be prepared for anything? And no, I want kind of off the cuff type stuff. Are you familiar with Prop 207?
Yes, what I read in the newspapers, and I briefly looked at the proposition. Yes.
Okay. Now, and I have a question regarding your opinion, regarding the people who you have defended for marijuana cases. What was the overall resounding thoughts, feelings, themes of these people who had simple possession charges, who had, just minor cases? I'm not talking trafficking or anything like that, but what was your opinion of how the cases were handled? If there's anything in particular that you can think of that sticks out, but
shock.
Okay.
Initial shock that it could be a felony.
Okay.
Having a small amount of personal use of marijuana, and that it's a felony.
Right.
And when you explain to them that they can lose civil rights, the right to vote, the right to travel, be placed on probation, that it can affect their ability to get employment with a felony conviction, the ability to get financial aid, the ability to rent an apartment.
Right.
And they're absolutely in shock. And so the government then has a lot of leverage when they offer that person task, which
Right.
is diversion. And so it eliminates the desire to litigate, go to trial.
Okay.
And again, that goes back to mandatory sentences. More than 90%, I think 95% or more of cases are pled out.
Okay.
And
For possession, or do you just mean in general?
in general.
Okay.
Our system was founded on the idea that you have a right to a jury trial,
Right.
or at least a bench trial, and litigate your innocence. But even innocent people will take a deal because the repercussions are so grave. So when you get a client and you explain to them the ramifications of possible felony conviction for this minor crime, they're in shock, and so they'll accept diversion. Or they'll accept that misdemeanor, conviction
just to be done with it, just to get it over with.
Just to be done with and get it over with. Maybe they don't want to. Maybe they have a very good issue on the illegal stop or illegal arrest, illegal search. It wasn't theirs.
Right.
I mean, sometimes that's true.
Agreed.
And in Arizona, if you're in a car and there's 4 people and there's marijuana underneath the one seat, everybody can get charged for constructive possession. And people, again, are in shock.
I have actually been in situations like that in law enforcement.
And so, they do what is the least difficult, least costly. Not only in terms, people always say, I'll go to trial. And I go, well, you don't really understand what you're saying. There's a lot of stress involved. The system takes a while. So you're living with this thing for a year, maybe
Right.
2 years. You can't think of anything other than your case, your future. It costs money. If you hire a decent criminal defense lawyer, it could easily be $5,000 up front. Then you might need a expert witness. That's maybe another $5,000. And then there's going to be a trial fee, and then you might need exhibits and transcripts. It's costly in many facets. So that's why so many cases are pled. And then you couple that with mandatory sentencing provisions. In Arizona, if you have 2 pounds or over of marijuana, it's mandatory prison.
Right.
So, if you have fentanyl, mandatory prison. If you have, a certain amount of certain drugs, it's flat time prison.
Right.
It really is a difficult decision for somebody who believes that they are truly innocent in electing to go to trial.
Just because it's cost prohibitive.
Yes.
And I don't comprehend why it costs so much. One of the things that I was kind of astonished to learn, I recently got my bachelor's degree, and one of my professors was I won't say who he was, but he was a high-ranking official for an Arizona agency that deals with law enforcement. It's I actually forget that it's CJC, but I forget exactly what it stands for. But essentially, what they do is say a little small town Arizona is having an issue, a crime problem of some sort. Small town Arizona will go to this department and say, hey, we're having an issue with this. This department comes forward and says, hey, here's a plan, here's funding, here's money. All of that agency and that funding comes from mandatory sentences, comes from drug fees, drug fines, just getting people in the system.
Oh, don't even get me started.
Let's go. Let's get started.
Another issue is basically law enforcement has a right to hijack citizens. I mean, I've had cases where the police stop you. There's $10,000 in your car, and they take it.
Right.
The forfeiture laws in Arizona are ridiculous around the country. Accused has the onus of establishing that those proceeds were lawfully acquired.
Right.
Which normally it's the government that has to establish beyond a reasonable doubt, or have the onus of establishing that you obtain that money unlawfully. With the forfeiture laws, it's the opposite, and sometimes it can be rather difficult to establish that money, how you acquired it lawfully.
Right.
I mean, you could have garage sales and acquire that, and then you have to try to establish that's how you obtain this money, but they just seize it.
Right.
And then what does the defendant do? They go to a lawyer, and the lawyer goes, "I'll charge you $5,000 to get your $10,000 back," and it could be more. I mean, it's and then they don't get charged with a criminal offense.
Right. Yeah. No, I've seen those situations where civil forfeiture
and
comes in.
And it happens a lot more than people really understand.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. And I do have personal experience in that as well. And the civil forfeiture for like vehicles is very easy. The burden of proof is very, very low, and it's very, very easy. And yeah, that's exactly it. Law enforcement can just swipe and then sell it. If it's junk, they can sell it wholesale, whatever it may be.
I remember when I was a young prosecutor, and we once forfeited a plane, and we were giddy because now our little office has a plane.
Yeah, hey, I got a plane. Why not?
Why not? It's a lawful way to steal from the public.
Agreed. And then profit from it by selling it or whatever the case is.
Absolutely, yes.
So one of the things that leads to convictions and court and all that good stuff is obviously getting contacted by the police. And you and I have had discussions in the past about this stuff regarding what's going on in the world right now. What would be some suggestions that you have regarding when people are contacted by law enforcement? And again, I want to hear your side. And then again, I do have the law enforcement background, but you have both the prosecuting side and the defending side. I'm curious to what your thoughts are.
Some of my closest friends are former police.
Okay.
And I grew up with an ethic that the police are to be trusted.
Okay.
I'm Hispanic. Both my parents lawfully came to the United States. They're from Mexico. My mother in particular had a high regard for law enforcement, and she drilled it into us that if you were ever in trouble, you go to a police officer.
Gotcha.
Police officers are good. So that's still my core belief. And as a young prosecutor, I grew up with police officers, went on ride-alongs. They were patrol officers, became sergeant, lieutenants, captains, retired. And so I fully support law enforcement. I fully support officers. I've been out there on I-10, Quartzsite, with friends on a ride-along, 2 a.m. They pull over a car. It's suspicious. The hairs on the back of your arms go up. And I've seen good friends get out of the car and approach this car, and they tell me how to use the radio and yell 999. Officer needs immediate assistance, and how to use the shotgun. And that's scary.
Yeah. That is.
And that backup is 10 minutes, and that's a lifetime.
Oh, I can tell you right now that I've had situations that I waited 45 minutes for backup.
Yeah. And so, it takes a lot of guts.
Yeah.
A lot of command presence, and you just know there's something not quite right about these 4 individuals.
Right.
You just know. You get this feeling, and so, I support law enforcement, but I support law enforcement that does it correctly and does it not violating a person's civil rights or constitutional rights. So with that in mind, I tell people, you need to assert all your rights.
Right.
But first you need to understand what your rights are. And we've had this conversation. I'm shocked that American citizens know so very little about their rights. I did a video where I was stopped in Tubac. There's a roving immigration stop there, and I was coming back with my investigator from interviewing Homeland Security agents in Nogales, Arizona. We never crossed into there, but we're coming back, and my investigator, former cop, DPS, we're stopped there, and again, we're Hispanic, so we get talked to and we're asked, "Are we U.S. citizens?" My buddy has no problem. He says yes, and then I'm a passenger. They asked me, "Are you a U.S. citizen?" I said, "Thank you very much for asking, officer, but I'm not going to answer your question today." Well, without going into the whole thing, you can see my YouTube on that. It was a full stop, and they made me go into a secondary, and I espouse assert your rights, but do it in a polite manner. You don't have to assert your rights impolitely or an aggressive manner. And so, I did. But you've got to know your rights. And on this YouTube, so many people saying, well, you should have cooperated. Why are you being so difficult? Well, I tell Americans that the Constitution was provided to us to make it incredibly difficult for law enforcement. That's the whole purpose, to protect us. We're Americans because we have rights.
Right.
And so my thing is assert your rights, know your constitutional rights. You don't have to talk to law enforcement, especially if you're innocent. I don't know how many people have gotten themselves in trouble by lying to a police officer over something stupid. And so they didn't commit a crime. There's no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion. The officer is wrong, but you lie to the cop, and the cop gets pissed off, and now you're in cuffs for lying to a cop. So know your rights and assert them.
I laugh only because I've been in those situations where I've had people where I had nothing. I had nothing, and people opened up their mouths and they talked and they gave me something. And what you're talking about, see, this is what I want to talk about, is the fact that there are situations when a law enforcement officer, it's called contempt of cop. The situation that you're just talking about, citizen might not have done anything wrong, but that moment that they lied, the cop does have the ability to, they do have discretion. And I do think that fundamentally that officer discretion is probably the most important tool that a law enforcement officer has. There's a lot of talk about making things mandatory and all that, and there's a lot of things I disagree with about that, because there's some situations that I have let slide because I had that discretion. But people don't assert their rights. They start talking, and they either talk. I said it a million times that people talk themselves into handcuffs all the time.
Absolutely. That's a good phrase.
Yep, they talk themselves into handcuffs. It's like, dude, if you just would have sat there and be quiet, nothing would have happened.
Be polite. I mean,
be polite.
You know, I've seen some YouTubers who contact me, and they're like, you know, the officers stand back, don't come here, and they're, hey, motherfucker, I have the right. Fuck you. And I'm like, there's no reason for that.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to be aggressive. You don't have to be impolite. Police officers are human. You know, they get scared too. They won't tell you.
Right.
There's that macho thing that goes on, but you know, they get scared, and they're human. They want to be treated with respect. So I think a lot of these confrontations can be diffused if citizens also understand that. You know, I've seen these videos too where people from the get-go just refuse commands. And I tell people, okay, you can verbally assert your rights and let the officer know, officer, I don't consent to this, but I'm going to cooperate with you. I'm going to get out of the car. I'm going to show you my hands. I don't consent to the search of my car, but I'm not going to stop you.
Right.
I don't consent to you patting me down. I don't consent to you arresting me, but don't do anything physically to resist. I tell people the time to object is in a courtroom with a lawyer, not on the side of the road where you're going to lose that battle.
I agree 100%. And because on the side of the road, people do want to argue, and there are some that do know their rights and they do know the law, but you're not going to win on the side of the road with a law enforcement officer, particularly if you have been pulled over, if you have committed a violation, and that officer's not just there for a consensual contact, but therefore, you know, you committed a crime, or maybe you were, law enforcement was called and they're there. That's not the time to argue. And I agree wholeheartedly with what you just said, is to just be polite. And again, you can be stern. You can assert your rights and say, I'm not talking to you. Thank you. You know, and then leave it at that. And you can't understand how people just keep pushing the envelope, and then it never works out well.
It doesn't work out in any context to be impolite to somebody else. But I tell them, you don't have to answer questions. Officer, I refuse to answer. You don't have to agree to a search of your person, your car. Officer, I refuse to consent. Don't sign any consents. Don't speak to the officer. Be polite. And you can record all of it, and you look much better in front of a jury or a judge when you are civil, but you assert all your rights. Then you allow your lawyer the ability to defend you on all your constitutional rights.
Right.
Once you consent, you waive all your rights to contest something that an officer did illegally. which reminds me, I had asked you to consult with me on a case where a Hispanic male was stopped by a DPS officer, and I knew it was a profile stop. Because the officer said that my client had a GPS on his windshield,
right,
that blocked his view, which was a pile of crap. In fact, I think out in La Paz County, an officer was dismissed because he stopped somebody because they said that they had one of those air fresheners on his mirror, blocked the view, and I mean, it just becomes a bunch of bullshit.
Right.
But he stopped for that, and then he had nothing. Kept the client on their side of the road and kept him talking until the client finally, makes some damning statements,
right.
And the DPS officer ended up finding drugs in the gas tank.
Right.
But this officer admitted that in at least 100 instances where the person consented to the search, he found nothing.
Right.
But he took apart, dismantled, the citizen's car out in the middle of the road, maybe kept them there an hour, and then found nothing, and not even I'm sorry.
Right.
So say no. Don't waive your rights. That's why we have the Constitution. It wasn't meant to make things easy for law enforcement.
No, not at all.
It was supposed to be a huge barrier.
And the thing about that is that now there are some things, though, that the Supreme Court, I do like to cover these aspects too. There are some things that the Supreme Court has said that law enforcement officers do have the authority to do. They can remove you from a car. They can control the passengers. You can't just leave. If you're a passenger in a traffic stop, you can't just leave. The officer can detain you. But at the same time, everyone in that car has rights, and everyone in that car can assert their rights. And the number one thing I said about all of this in my previous background and all that is that I appreciated when people asserted their rights. It actually made my job. It made my job easier. But at the same time, though, officers who are lazy they're not going to dig deeper. They're just going to go off of what the person said, off of the consent or whatever the case is. They're not going to make a legitimate, viable case off of actual detective work, so to speak. They're going to just go off of, the minimum stuff. They get the consent. Okay, boom. They get the person arrested. Whereas it's meant to make the police officer work. It's law enforcement, and the law and the government has rules they have to play by. And that's what the Constitution is. And that's what all the laws on the books are. And that's what all of that training is about. And again, I admit, full disclosure, that I have done exactly what you just said. I've kept somebody on the side of the road for an hour while I dismantled their car because I had a hunch, a feeling. I had more than that, though. I had behaviors and stuff like that. But yes, at the end of the day, I would put their car back together as best as possible and say, okay, take care. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. I admit it. It's part of who I was. It's my background. I can't help it. It's part of my training and what I did. And and this is
shame on you.
I know, right? I know. It was fun. Don't get me wrong. But the one thing, though, is that the one thing that I do always like to discuss is you have situations. There are criminals out there. There are people who are just flat out criminals. They want to hurt you. They want to hurt me. They want to break into this house. They want those things. And we need to focus on those things. We need to realign, like cannabis is now legal in the state of Arizona under certain circumstances in Prop 207. Great. We can now shift away from busting people for smoking a joint and start focusing more on, child crimes, whatever the case may be, sex trafficking and all that type of stuff.
I fully agree with you. I'm absolutely in favor of law enforcement. I'm in favor of giving law enforcement a lot more money. I'm not one of these defund the police. That's
agreed.
That's bullshit.
Agreed.
What I think our police officers should be paid very well, and should be trained very well, and should be given mental health counseling. It should not be something that's looked down upon. They have a difficult job. So I'm all for giving the police a lot more money, like teachers. So let's fund them.
Yeah.
Let's give them a lot of training.
Yeah.
And some police agencies, the officer has to buy their own uniform and gun and bullets. That's ridiculous. And they can't even afford to have that officer train with his weapon and shoot because ammunition is so expensive. So let's pay the officers really well. Let's get the best people in law enforcement, not the bottom of the barrel. Let's pay them well. Let's train them well. Let's invest in our officers. Let's teach them about the law, and give them the ability to get mental health counseling when they need it. And let's have the very best people out there to protect our rights. So if we get intelligent officers, well trained, well supported, well paid, it does a lot of good for all of us. It minimizes bad cops, bad apples, and we're officers that are willing to take a bribe. I mean, one of the problems that we have on the border is that these officers are paid so little.
Yes, very much.
And so, they're offered $500 or $1,000. It sounds like a lot of money to them to let those drugs go by.
Right.
If you pay them well, give them good benefits and good support, they don't need to do that.
Agreed. I'm very happy that you touched on the fact of mental health support, because this whole thing is not just about law enforcement, but this is a really hot button issue right now in the country. And there's a lot of departments invest zero money into a law enforcement officer's mental health. And I agree 100% that now there are some departments that are starting to turn the corner. There are some that are starting to offer this type of stuff. Every department says, oh, well, we have the employee assistance program. Just call that number and you're good. Well, it goes a lot deeper than that, and they need a lot more. And the realities of the job are day in, day out is trauma, dealing with dead bodies, dealing with dead kids, dealing with all of this, the worst of society on a daily basis. And mental health and funding them and everything is going to help with that. And this is an argument that I'd have made with people, is that if we defund the police, if we take away their money, you're going to hit the bottom of the barrel. You're going to be scraping the bottom of the barrel, because nobody wants to potentially get murdered making $58,000 a year.
It's an incredibly stupid idea. It's laughable.
Agreed.
And then to take away the stigma away from officers who need counseling.
Yeah.
I was in the sex crime unit almost 6 years, and I got to tell you, that's hard.
Yeah.
And especially now, back when I did it from 89 to 96, we didn't have these cell phones.
Right.
Video taping was rare. Once in a while, we would get a videotape of somebody committing a sex crime. That's hard to take.
It's disgusting.
And I still have visions in my head of people who committed ugly sex crimes and videotaped it. They're ingrained. I will never ever get those horrific images out of my head. I remember trying a couple of cases, and one was a mother and father who had sex with their mentally ill 26-year-old daughter. Years worth of tapes.
They filmed all this.
Absolutely, yes. And the big old VHS, police went there on a different call, served a search warrant, and lo and behold, here we've got this thing. This went to trial. I had years worth of tapes, and I showed the jury just maybe 10 minutes, just enough to make the charges stick. No. And they all complained that they needed mental health counseling after the trial. It was a big deal at the time, just that much. Yeah. And you get these detectives who devote their life to sex crimes, and now with the abundance of video, that just about every disgusting, depraved thing that a human being can do is videotaped. No. I used to think that I had some bizarre sexual fetishes. It come to learn when I was in the unit that my God, if I didn't have those kinds of things, I wouldn't be normal.
Right.
I learned what bizarre fetishes really were when I became part of the sex crimes unit. I mean, there's things out there that you don't even think about. I mean, it never crosses your mind. And now you have officers who are watching this
Day after day after day.
So they have a very twisted view of society.
Very much so. And the last 2 years of my career, I did child crimes. And before I had my first case, you're getting trained. And you're going to all this training around the country and all that. And I do recall one very, very good training that I went to that was put on by the federal government. They had mental health counselors at the training. Every day they would come out and says, listen, if everybody needs to talk, some of the things that we're going to cover are really, really difficult. And I recall this one training video that you have to watch. You have to see this stuff. You have to see what people are capable of. It was a nanny cam, and I'm not even gonna describe what I saw. But you had an entire room filled of, macho cops, male and female, doesn't matter, crying in tears, in hysterics. One dude slammed a book down and walked out, and would be just because the what they were watching was so terrible. And these are the realities that we're trying to get out there and show people that what cops have to deal with and all that good stuff, and what society has to deal with, and show the fact that there are criminals out there that are doing these types of horrible, disgusting things,
and things you wouldn't, and not just sexual. I mean, we had cases where people would throw newborns down, one of those porta potties. They take an iron to them, hot iron to them, and dip them in boiling hot water. And I mean, it's just the most depraved things. And so you have an officer detective that's doing this on a daily basis. They need our support. So I am pro police. I'm a criminal defense lawyer that's pro police.
You're the one.
Well, I don't know. I think a lot of us, we just believe that the system operates correctly when you got a robust defense bar, ethical prosecution, well-trained officers. You give the accused all the benefits of the Constitution. If they're lawfully and ethically convicted, then I see no problem with that.
Right.
We do our very best. As criminal defense attorneys, I tell younger lawyers, don't be a true believer. I mean, it's not about winning at all costs, no matter what side. It's ethically, lawfully preserving your client's rights. I've defended child molesters who committed the crime. There's no question.
Okay.
Have admitted to me.
Okay.
Sometimes I need to know the truth, and so my issue is not that you committed the crime. It's did the police and prosecutors lawfully obtain the evidence? Did they violate your constitutional rights? And sometimes they do. Sometimes they didn't get the proper warrant for that computer. They didn't enter your home lawfully. Well, we file the motion, we aggressively argue it and seek to preclude the evidence, and there goes the case.
Right.
I have no issue with that. Okay, that's why I believe police should be better trained. So that
as a
happen.
former law enforcement officer, I have no problem with what you just said either. The cops need to be on there. They need to dot all the I's, dot all the I's and cross all the T's and make sure everything's buttoned down and legally and ethically and morally sound before they go and make the arrest, particularly on such a heinous crime such as that.
Yeah, because what happens is, they nab this person illegally, but what about the 100 other people that their homes or their rights were trampled and they didn't commit a crime, they didn't do anything illegally. I mean that's the issue. There needs to be balance. As long as we do everything constitutionally sound, if a person committed a crime, they should be held accountable.
I agree,
and they should be
100%.
held accountable based on that particular crime, that particular person. Not all defendants are equally guilty or the same. There's mitigation. And again, that goes back to my statement that I think judges should be allowed the discretion to be judges and to make that ultimate call on what the sentence should be.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So what is the point of a judge if they're not going to, if they have no ability to, if they're not hampered down by the law and what the law says? Yeah, no, that's a very good point. So no, I appreciate your thoughts on that. And it's the mental health aspect of it that really bothers me the most, because that criminal got there in some way too. They have mental health issues as well. Locking a person up for whatever the case may be doesn't necessarily quash the mental health issues. And then how do those people reenter society if they're not getting any kind of the care or the help or anything that they need or anything like that? So this is not just a 100% pro-cop podcast in any way, shape, or form, because the ones that are doing bad need to be held accountable.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I have no sympathy for bad policing or bad officers.
Agreed. Particularly ones who are using their power on duty and using their authority on duty, which is, there have been many cases recently that are coming out. But that's also the thing, though, too, is that the other side is not shown in any way, shape, or form about the good that's done. It's only the bad. And unfortunately, people's minds just get jaded when all they see is bad, bad, bad. But unfortunately, everything's on video now. And I don't comprehend how in this day and age, in this electronic digital age where you can Google stuff, how law enforcement officers are making very minor mistakes that are very, very costly. And I'll just real quick, I believe there's the case, Breonna Taylor case, and now that those officers are going through the system, and some are being terminated, and they're looking at that. I mean, one of the officers, he did no independent verification of the search warrant. That's number one as a detective. And then, things could have been mitigated, but either poor training or poor, whatever the case is, poor leadership, poor supervisory or supervision, or whatever the case is, unfortunately led to terrible consequences. And that's just one case, but that does happen quite a bit. Where they need better training, they need more funding, they need, things that are going to allow them to do their jobs. And you said something very, very perfect, was that they're there to protect our rights. They're there to protect the citizens' rights. Law enforcement is the government, but they're also there to protect our rights. So they're going to get their pound of flesh if somebody does something wrong. If somebody commits a crime, the government's going to get their pound of flesh out of that person. But they are ultimately there for our rights and our protection.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Any other thoughts on this matter?
No, not really. I believe as citizens we should give police officers respect and cooperation. But at the same time, cooperation doesn't mean giving up your rights.
Right.
And that's what I want Americans to understand. Know your rights, assert your rights, and be proud that you got those rights. I had so many comments on my YouTube. Well, that will never happen in Korea, or in North Korea. That will never happen in China. If you did that, you'd get shot. And I go, that's the whole point.
We won the lottery by being Americans.
It's like, they can't assert their rights.
Right.
And so we're Americans. We have these rights. We have the constitutional rights. It's American to assert them, but
yes.
Assert them lawfully,
Yes.
Which reminds me, I have to touch on what's happened here at our state capitol.
100%.
Free speech doesn't mean go over there and destroy our country. Free speech doesn't mean. I disagree with the legislature or the Congress, so I'm going to go over there and I'm going to destroy our capital. So.
Prior to this interview, you and I had a short discussion, and I think we both agree that it doesn't matter if you're on the left or on the right, or Republican or Democrat. If you act like an animal, you need to be treated like an animal in some cases and take responsibility for your actions.
It's disheartening. I mean, we're Americans.
We're Americans.
This is our country, and what are we doing? I was just shocked that Americans waving American flags or in the Capitol defacing one of the greatest symbols of freedom.
And that was my entire point was, I don't care what side of the aisle that person who's doing that is, what their actions are flat out wrong. Storming the Capitol, hurting people died because of this. And, there's a way that this could have been handled, obviously. But again, I don't care what side of the aisle that person is that's committing those crimes. That action is wrong in and of itself.
AJ, which I found very interesting, a lot of these people who took pride in storming the Capitol immediately after changed their appearance.
Yeah. Right.
They went there all with long beards, long hair, and all of a sudden when they're arrested, they're absolutely clean cut.
Of course.
Why, if you're so proud of what you did, why are you trying to hide your identity?
Right. It's because they're cowards. They committed a cowardly act, and because they're cowards, and now they don't want to get caught.
Yeah.
And the resounding theme was that I had seen was, I thought I was doing good. I've seen several people that have said something along those lines. It's like, did you not think about your actions when you were doing them?
But what's interesting though, if I got a call from somebody and said, "Hey Robert, would you defend me?" I would say, "Yeah, you have a right to
right.
You have a right to a true defense."
Right.
That is the difficulty people have when it comes to a defense lawyer. Our system doesn't work if you're not willing to help even the most heinous of crimes.
Right. Right.
As a private lawyer, though, I have the right to say, you know what, I'm gonna pass on this.
Right.
But public defenders don't.
Right. Unfortunately, they get thrown. Whatever.
Back to that, sometimes they get the really ugly cases. But yeah, even they deserve a robust defense and allow them to explain why they may or may not be responsible to the extent that they're charged.
Gotcha. Understood.
But as a private citizen, not having a client, I would just say what happened was just a disgrace.
I agree with that comment. I agree completely with that comment. So you've mentioned your YouTube video though several times though. What is your YouTube channel though, so we can get that out there?
Just my name, Robert J. Campos.
Okay.
And Google my name. You're gonna see some of my videos. I'm all for asserting your rights. Just assert your rights lawfully, calmly, and respectfully. There's no need to be disrespectful to the police officers. Sometimes they just don't know better.
Agreed.
They haven't been trained very well, and I think we just need to tone down the hostility and the rhetoric, and we are privileged. I still believe we live in the greatest country in the world.
100%.
We have issues and problems. We're not perfect, but there's no other place in the world I'd rather be.
I agree wholeheartedly. And one of the things that in my new positions that I've taken in a few things, one of the things that I have tried to explain to people as well is that not all law enforcement agencies are equal. There's not just the police. There's each individual agency that has their own training, that has their own funding, that has their own everything. And just because you got, pulled over by Phoenix PD, who's very well funded and very well trained for the most part and all that good stuff, you might not get the same thing in, again, small town Arizona, that they don't have the training, they don't have the funding. And without going into specifics, there are police agencies who have been known as second chance agencies here, where problem officers
third chance
agencies. That is correct. And I'm sure you've ran into some of these issues.
Absolutely.
And what we're talking about in regarding that is an officer gets terminated from one position at a law enforcement agency. I won't go into the specifics about post certification and all that, but they keep their certification and they can move to another agency, assuming that the charge is not too serious, and go work for that agency. And sometimes
at $13 an hour.
At $13 an hour in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the other previous agency sometimes doesn't follow through with what they're doing at the tail end of getting rid of that officer. So therefore the case that officer is still allowed to be a police officer because it was just easier to just let him go and let him go away and all that type of stuff. So unfortunately you do get a perpetual cycle of bad officers in certain instances, in certain agencies that don't have the funding for brand new officers, fully trained through the law enforcement academy and all that good stuff. So this is an issue that, needs to be pointed out.
My desire is that if my wife is stopped at 2:00 in the morning on a desolate street by a police officer, that she should not be in fear.
Agreed.
That she should say, "Oh, it's police. I'm protected. Thank God."
Yep.
But recently, especially in Arizona, there's been cases where police officers, DPS officers, have actually assaulted the woman. And I did a YouTube video on know your rights when you're pulled over by a police officer. I mean, that's unfortunate that you need to be concerned that officer that is there to protect you will actually commit a crime against you. So, that's what I don't want. I want all of us to be proud of our law enforcement. We have top-notch people who are paid well, supported well, who don't trample on our rights, who protect us, don't hurt us, and especially minorities.
Agreed.
And I'm Hispanic. My parents came here from Mexico. They became lawful U.S. citizens, and I think it's immigrants that actually have sometimes, I believe, a greater love for America than Americans born here, because they don't know better. They don't understand the gift that they have by being born in the United States and being American.
I could not agree anymore. God bless America.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good place to stop. What do you think?
I thank you for having me here, AJ.
Any closing thoughts?
No, one of the privileges that I have had as a lawyer is meeting great people like you and becoming friends. So
I agree with that. Thank you. So just real quick, Robert Campos, your phone number is?
602-222-3440.
And do you have any other social media other besides the YouTube?
I have, my website, robertjcampos.com. A lot of information on my website. If my name is Googled, Robert J. Campos, you'll see my videos and give an honest defense.
Yes, you do.
And an honest price.
Yes, you
do. I try to make friends with my clients, and often they become family. So, we do our best.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.